Good afternoon from Eastern Time in the United States, and good evening, good morning, or for those who are joining anytime later, greetings as well. I'm Dr. Troy Hicks. I am currently serving as chairperson of the Department of Teacher and Special Education at Central Michigan University, and I'm glad to be here today with my colleague, Dr. Kristen Turner, who I will let introduce herself briefly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. I am Kristen Turner, and I am professor and chair of education at Drew University in New Jersey, where we are having quite the weather event, and hopefully I can not lose power during this presentation.
We'll wish that well for everyone then. We're going to drop a link into the chat. The next two slides are just reminders for us to hit record, which we have already done, and then also to remind you that you are part of the Future of AI conference, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, and that it is also co-sponsored by Helper Consulting. So greetings, welcome, and if you want to say a quick hello in the chat and tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do. We are both in the field of teacher education and professional development broadly, but in particular working with literacy teachers at the higher education level, former classroom teachers, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about you and what brings you to this conversation about inviting writers to use AI tools. We know that the hard work is just beginning, as was alluded to in the keynote. There are so many questions and concerns, ethical, environmental, productive struggle, how we get students to use these tools without simply falling into the patterns of cheating. But we have some ideas and some suggestions, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of you who happen to be in the chat with us and are going to share your ideas as we go along. So I will drop that bit.ly in there one more time for those who just hopped in the last few moments, and hopefully you can get back to it. And for those in the chat, if you might repost that for us as we go, we'll try to monitor, but if we miss it, please give us a hand. All right, so we're going to get started here. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen to give an overview and our first couple talking points. So Kristen, please take it away.
So it's lovely to see so many library media specialists and writing teachers, and I think this is such an interesting conversation to have across disciplines and across rooms if you happen to be in a school working together. Our title is Now the Hard Work Begins, because we are at heart writing teachers and teachers of writing teachers, and we've been thinking about writing and the impacts of technology on writing for a very long time. And AI is presenting us with new challenges, and as we think about the challenges that are being presented, sometimes we hear that AI is just making writing too easy. It's making everything much easier for students to just copy and paste or have an output. But one of the things that we'd like to do in the next 30 minutes is to reconsider the ways that students can use Gen AI in ethical, productive, and responsible manners as writers, with hard work, so not losing the productive struggle of writing. So we don't have much time, but we're hoping in the next 30 minutes we can define writing, address some concerns, and maybe flip those around and turn them into possibilities for Gen AI and writers, and then go through an example of task of how we might use Gen AI throughout the writing process with our students. So the first thing we would like you to do is to just drop a word or phrase in the chat answering this question: what is writing? So we're just going to take a minute and see what populates in the chat here. What is writing? Right? They're coming so fast: thinking, revision, discovery, voice, expression, creativity, communication. These are all great. And kind of embedded in all of these are this idea that writing is something human that we do in our brains and then share with others. So it's both cognitive and social. And there's a lot of research over the years to support that. Troy and I are both members of the National Council of Teachers of English, who has been a leader in the field of thinking about how technologies impact writing and what writing is. And in 2019, NCTE published the definition of literacy in a digital age. And we really encourage everyone, if you haven't taken a look at that framework, to go look at that framework. It talks a lot about writers and audience and purpose and task, but also about how technologies are influencing the ways that we do literacy or our literacy practices in this new world. And it helps us to think about what it means when we add AI into a world where writers exist. So one thing that we like to think about from the definition of literacy in a digital age is that writing or literacies are interconnected, dynamic, and malleable. So they are always tied up with each other. They are always changing and they are always shifting just a little bit. And that we as literate beings have agency in that. So our question for today is really, how can we make writing interconnected, dynamic, and malleable in this age of Gen AI, where we have all of these tools available to us as writers? So whenever we think about bringing a new technology into the classroom, we start with, well, what are the challenges or the potential problems or pitfalls that might come into the classroom or might arise as we incorporate technologies, particularly with writers? And we will admit, we have heard a lot of challenges over the last couple of years as Gen AI has rolled out, has become more accessible to younger writers, more complicated for more veteran writers who are changing the way that they do things. And these are just some of the problems that we hear. Of course, probably the biggest one is that issue of, is Gen AI making writing easier? Is it removing the productive struggle? Is it a shortcut? Are students cheating? Are they just plagiarizing or using an output as their own writing? So this is definitely something that we talk with teachers a lot about, and we're dealing with in our own practice as well. We also hear potential problems when it comes to equity and access. And this is something that we've been dealing with since technologies have been incorporated into the writing classroom. It's something that both Troy and I have researched and pushed back on for over 2 decades, about how in resource limited situations, schools might either shut down AI or might not have access to AI, which is not equitable. And so it's going to increase a digital divide if not all students can learn to use the tools. We also hear a lot about bias, and bias comes in a couple of ways. There's, of course, bias in the data that AI is trained on, but there's also bias in all of the AI detection, or some people are calling them checkers, the AI checkers. And the idea that students who are non-native speakers are typically scoring lower, and they are actually being disadvantaged when we use detection systems that are biased. And then a fourth one that we are thinking a lot about is the emotional work of teaching. We know that AI has the potential to change what we do as educators and how students learn, but we also don't believe that AI can change or replace the power of human relationships and social learning. So Troy, I just summarized that problems, but is there anything you want to say about the problems and pitfalls and what you're hearing from the teachers that you work with or from your own students?
Sure. So I'll just pick up on one that was just mentioned in the keynote. Again, there is a definite concern about the environmental and social impacts of AI and the people that are being potentially exploited to create these systems. And that is a little above and beyond where we are today, but certainly a conversation I think that we need to have. A great book that references this problem and outlines where it's come from and where we're at is The Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford. But I really think we've kind of captured all of this and some of the key themes from the keynote and what I've been hearing from teachers with these problems here.
Great, thanks. So if we think about all those problems, we could focus on those, or we could kind of flip them around and search for the possibilities in technologies that exist, that students have access to, and that we as writers also have access to. So we can ask questions rather than just focusing on how do we not cheat with AI. We might ask questions about how we model and encourage the productive struggle that is writing, and how can we find joy in that process, and maybe use AI to help us find a little bit more joy or a different kind of joy than we ever have before. The equity and access issues are real, and we keep coming back to this idea. If we fail to teach students how to effectively prompt, engage with, analyze the outputs, all that critical literacies that we need in other forms of technology and text, if we fail to do that for all of our students, from all geographies, from all locations, from all levels, then we really are creating more equity and access issues as well. And then with bias and detection, we can also flip that and ask, well, how can we help all writers understand how and why to use different language patterns? And how can AI help them to understand different language patterns and to grow in their language use? And then finally, for the emotional work of teaching, we don't believe that a machine is coming for our jobs. We believe we have a lot that we can offer here, and we can show students how to use AI more effectively, but also be models for them in ethical use. And this is something that we are still exploring and trying to figure out in this new landscape. And so we're going to learn alongside our students, as we always do when new technologies come to bear. So we'd like to kind of shift and think about 3 ways we could envision AI through the idea of possibility in becoming a collaborator with a writer or our student writers. So we've been thinking about AI as a writing partner or as a thinking partner, AI as a research assistant, and AI as a co-writer. So this is kind of a continuum of how AI might work through a writing process or a writer's process. Certainly, it's not a linear process. Thinking partners come in at all stages of pre-work, revision, feedback, even publishing. Research assistants help us get started in that pre-writing phase, but then they can also come back around as we're drafting, and then again as we're revising and looking for more information. And then the one that we really have been challenging ourselves to think about is AI as a co-writer. And Troy and I have been co-writing for about 20 years together. And so we have a lot of experience working with another human being and writing over the human being and sharing and working together collaboratively. And so we've been thinking hard about what it might mean if we are positioning ourselves as co-writers with AI as compared to just AI supporting the work we do, but it actually is really in there with us with the thinking and everything. So I just wanted to kind of shape those 3 ways that we are thinking about AI. And I'm going to turn it over to Troy, who's going to walk us through a potential process of using several tools in those ways.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I actually did want to address one other equity concern that came up in the chat. Elon mentioned that there's this idea that our multilingual learners are likely to be unduly punished when they lack confidence and they might turn to AI, whereas native English speakers might use it and be able to adjust it, and then who might be punished and so forth. So it goes along with that bias. And then also, we have to face it. I heard another colleague talk about this recently too. The large language models are pulling from a largely English Western way of talking and writing and thinking on the web. And so that's something that when we see the AI outputs, they are largely informed by a dominant, sometimes hegemonic culture, and we need to be mindful of that. So yeah, to pick up on what Kristen was just saying with the AI as thinking partner, research assistant, co-writer, and thanks Lisa for the shout out there in the chat. We want to see this as a way to help educators frame AI for their students and to help students engage, and also perhaps in a way getting more and more integrated and iterative with the AI as they go. Sometimes they're moving back and forth between a chatbot, but sometimes they're using tools like we'll explore here with Writer and WordTune and Quillbot, where it is generating text for them, and we want them to think again productively and ethically and responsibly about how they are making those writerly choices so they can do all those things that you were just talking about in the chat, bring their own voice, make conscious decisions, and become better writers in the process. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. We have a few ways that we are thinking about how best to position writers to use these tools. And the tools kind of overlap and blend between the thinking partner and the research assistant and the co-writer. You'll see some of those evident in some not so evident, but we hope to have a little bit of a discussion at the end about what you've seen in all of these examples. Now, these are links to different documents and ChatGPT outputs and things like that, so feel free to click and play along. I'm going to move out of full screen mode here just for a second, so it won't get too crazy as we hop from one to the next. So the first piece that we try to think about when we are teaching argument writing in particular, and I know there's narrative writing and any number of other forms, we're really going to home in on argument right now because that's one of the things that Kristen and I have learned to do well and appreciate doing in our teaching and learning. So if there are other ideas, we can talk about narrative and poetic and other personal types of writing too. But We want students first to join the conversation. We want them to become aware of what's been said before. This is actually why we cite things, right? To show that we've read a little bit and that we are actually joining into a conversation, joining that Burkean parlor for those that are rhetoricians, or for those that might be familiar with Graff and Birkenstein's "they say, I say," this idea that we are trying to bring people to the table and understand different perspectives on an argument. So one of the prompts that I've tried to do with students and to get them to use a little bit more is to take something like this. So I'm going to grab the kind of blank, fill in the blank prompts here and put them in the Zoom chat. So go ahead and take a look at that. But then what you'll see is that I've in ChatGPT filled in what writing teachers do. We look for roles, we look for audiences, we look for different formats and genres, we look for topics, we look for strong verbs to take action. And so in this case, I imagine I'm going to try to be a meteorologist. I'm writing an email to my producer, and I'm trying to convince my producer that I should talk directly to our viewers and think more about human induced climate change. We know this is not necessarily given us an opportunity. I'm hoping that someone in the chat can work to do that. We've also turned on closed captioning, so you could turn on closed captionings if you do need those as well. Um, but then you can see through the prompt, it will start to generate and give us some examples. Here are some of the key ideas. Here are some places that you can go. Now, it's not linked yet, not necessarily like what Copilot would do or Perplexity, but it is there, and we could go do some research and getting us into the conversation. What are the arguments for? What are the arguments against? How would we want to position this and talk about it in terms of what we need to do when we present this to our producer and eventually to our viewers of our meteorological report. So this is one way to get students to start prompting and thinking about entering the conversation, and then to make sure, of course, that you're citing your credible sources and using different strategies. We'll come back to the second part of this chat in just a moment. The next thing that we might want to do is to get our writers to explore different points of view. So in this example, and you can click and see this report right here, let's imagine that we had students read the IPCC climate report, but we want them to understand what it is that's being said and what potential problems or challenges could be present. So in this case, we went to, at the time, it was Bing, Copilot, whatever we want to call it right now, we'll call it Copilot for the moment. Um, Take the IPCC report, and then please, if you could, tell us language that is considered politically biased and describe whether it's more conservative or liberal. And so if you try to do that, it will then give you some examples. And you can actually drill in a little bit more and ask it to identify specific examples of language and things like that. So in this case, in this world, we were talking about this during the keynote as well, mis and disinformation. AI has the opportunity to perpetuate that, but it also has the opportunity to help students really see this and to make it more evident where these different words and phrases could be and how to discern them. Kristen, thoughts about any of those things before I move on to the searching for additional evidence?
No, I just want to layer back into this idea of AI as thinking partner and AI as research assistant. And you can see how there's not a delineation line between those two. So in some ways, what Troy has just been sharing with you is a way that AI can help a student think through concepts. And in some ways, it's also a research assistant who's helping the student to get information and understand more about a topic before they even jump into writing.
Thanks. So then how can we get students to actually delve in and search for more evidence? So with this prompt, what we're trying to think about is how to get them to move into that conversation a little more deeply. So again, we could try something like this. So again, I'm the meteorologist. I'm preparing to write this email and this op-ed. I'm familiar with, and as you can see, I'm familiar with that recent IPCC or IPCC report. But what other evidence might be useful? What other sources could be helpful for my viewers? And in this case, I switched over to Gemini because I did want some actual citations and links out to some other places. So it did. It gave me some links to NASA. It mentioned NOAA, didn't link to it yet necessarily, but it gave some different places where to look for statistics or climate model projections. how to meet the needs of your audience. This is what we're always trying to do as writers, is meet the needs of a specific audience. But this gives us conversational points as, again, rhetorical focus. What is going to be most convincing? What's just going to be superfluous and a flourish on top? Or what's going to actually speak to the needs of your audience and help be convincing based on what they consider to be persuasive evidence? So then we move forward to the next stage. We need help. We need to make an outline. What can we do just to get things started? Quillbot, I found, and maybe others have different examples, but for me at least, Quillbot seems to be one of the most effective tools at just creating an outline. We worry about having students go and potentially cheat. So if we go to Quillbot Flow, let's see if this is my actual outline. I can't remember which one it is. But what you'll see is when you go into, oh, no, it wasn't. If you go to Quillbot Flow, it gives you just a tiny prompt box to fill in, and then it gives you a couple different genres to choose from, but all of them produce an outline. And then from that outline, we can further engage our writers in conversations about, okay, what's evident? What do you already know? What did it introduce that was new? Where could you go to search for more information? And so giving students that start can be helpful as well. Now, what's interesting though is with Quillbot, it will generate text. So you can see here is just one example. And let's imagine that I'm hiding or highlighting one here. And I say, hey, I would like to get some more information, some more examples here. It will start to generate text for us. We can add it, and then we can also make sure that it gets cited. Now, that's a little bit beyond what we have time for to talk about today about the ethics of citing APA, MLA, when, why, how. Do we cite Google searches? Well, now maybe we do because they're putting AI output at the top of them. But when, why, and how do we cite this? Is it similar to like what we would do with Wikipedia or whatnot? But at the very least, once you have the outline developed and you start to add text to it, it will give you that option. So we move then from the outline to the actual drafting. And in this case, I used a tool called Writer. And what Writer allowed me to do then was to go in and see some different models, some different examples. What can I do? How can I get started? What might I be able to change and play with? Well, what's great, again, we're constantly talking about tone and voice and bringing different types of, just different types of perspectives to our writing. It will allow you to choose different tones and to change from compassionate to cautionary to awestruck to assertive and any number in between. It will also allow you different use cases. So again, as we're talking about genre and purpose, we could say, well, maybe we don't want to just write this out as a big long email. Maybe we want to make it a call to action, or maybe we want to make it a script for a YouTube video that we might be able to come up with later. Or maybe we want to turn it into an actual story and make it more of a personal example. So there's all these different options it will generate. And then much like Quillbot, with Writer, you can go in and you can ask it to make these changes and additions as well. What I think is interesting is at this point, if you're going to ask it to expand, just like we did with Quillbot, that could be a moment where you have students take a screenshot and say, here were my three choices. Here's the one I chose. Here's why I thought it was important, and so forth. Again, I'm going to pause for just a second before I go to the feedback. I see there's quite a bit of chatter in the Zoom chat. And Kristen, are there any other ideas we should address before we share these last?
Yeah, I just want to point out, because you're saying it all the time, but I don't want it to be hidden, that each of these uses of the tool is followed by conversations with the writer or reflections of the writer on the quality of the output, what the output is giving, whether the output is useful in the process. So while we're going through these things as if it's like, oh, we just do this, this, and this, just to understand that it doesn't take the teacher out of this at all, or even other writers in the writing community, to continue to have these conversations about what the AI is producing or how the AI is helping the writer move forward.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think the word you use often is agentive or agentive. Like, how are we helping our writers take that agentive stance so they are actively making choices? And again, going back to the top of our chat conversation, what are the choices we want them to make? How do we help them be metacognitive and reflective as they are making choices about creativity, making choices about the resources that they integrate and the evidence that they use. These are all the types of things that we can have conversations about. And whether we're drawing from our good, kind of lists of verbs from Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge, or we look at statements like NCTE's definition of literacy in a digital age, we can have those conversations with writers. Oh, tell me a bit more. Here it looks like you made this move. Why did you do this? How did the AI help? How did the AI hinder? All right, we'll look at a couple more examples here real quick, and then maybe have a few moments for questions at the end. The next step, of course, is that we're asking for feedback, and we don't pretend that this is perfect. And we also understand that trying to get to 20 or 30 writers in the room and 75, 100, 150 essays in a weekend is just impossible. So how can we teach our writers to ask for the kinds of feedback and help them get that feedback from some of these chatbots? So you'll see again, if you go back to that chat GPT output, I just kept that conversation going. I said, hey, here's a draft of my essay. What evidence is useful? What evidence is not? Please rank the quality and effectiveness of my evidence. So Kristen and I have talked a lot about that. We've learned that strategy from George Hillocks and others who talk about ranking evidence and thinking about the impact it will have on your audience. And so I put the essay in, put the triple quotes around here so it knows here's the essay, and then here's what it produced. It effectively outlines the urgency, but here I'm going to rank the evidence and offer some suggestions of improvement. So it said, this is what I think is most important. Here's what's effective. Here's what it could be improved. Here's the second one, most effective, could you be improved, so on and so forth. So you can see that using this kind of prompting language, we can actually get students to hopefully get some of the kinds of feedback that they might want. And then last but not least, they can publish and share. And in this instance, I just wanted to show you the output. I went to Gamma, which is one of those presentation building tools, plugged in the essay, said, I want a slide deck that looks something like this to get started, and it put out the slide deck. Now, this could be, yes, the final product, but it could also be something that you then say, all right, here's what Gamma thought was important, kind of in a top level summary that it put into slides. Did you think at all about crop damage in your essay? Was that just kind of an interesting little add-on that got put in there? Or is that something you want to accentuate? Do we need to add another slide? Do we need to go back to your essay and add another paragraph? So not only can this be used as a presentation and publication tool, it can actually, again, help them reflect and think about their writing process. All right, so as we come to a close, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen for some critical questions, I'll push it back into slideshow mode. In the chat, let's think about this. What, again, is writing? What do we value about writing? And how might we use AI to enhance those values and those things that we believe? And here are some other questions that we might consider.
So thanks, Troy, for running through all of that process and sharing all of the outputs. And even something as little as you've got to put triple quotes around the essay so that it knows that it's the essay to give you feedback. All of these tips are really good for writers. For us as writing teachers who are always thinking about technologies and how they influence writing, as Troy said, I do like to really think about who has the agency and where we are giving the agency. So when we're thinking about technologies, if we say, what do the technologies assume about the nature of writing, what it is, what it does, and how it works? We are giving agency then to the technology to make the assumption. So we can also flip that and say, what do these technologies help me to think about the nature of writing is? And so that's the invitation right now. We started off with what is writing. You've listened for a little bit. If you have any other different ideas that might have popped up about what is writing in this new age of Gen AI, please feel free to share them in the chat. But we also want to think about writers and the agency that writers have in this process and how they are making choices, how they are thinking about the technologies and what the technologies might be assuming about them, who they are, what they do, why they do it, and then taking that agency back so that they have the choices in this process. And then for teachers of writing, what do we as teachers of writing need to know about writers first? And we always put writers first, right? And AI is a tool. It's not a writer. It's not a human with human capabilities. And then teaching writing in a digital age with these new Gen AI tools? So these are just questions that we're constantly asking ourselves, and we're hoping that you will take back with you as well. And then finally, if we move out from the teaching of writing and the tools that impact writing, it really leads us into this questioning about educational technology and AI more broadly. When, how, and why do we need to advocate for these technologies as an issue of equity, perhaps? And then when should we push back on them, or when should we look at them a little bit more carefully and again, give the agency to the humans who are using the technologies? Anything else, Troy?
No, I think you've really summarized it well. I'm going to advance to our last slide. A few more resources for you available at the end. Check them out if you have time, and then put our contact information up there. We know you have to get to your next session, but I think this room will remain open for a few minutes, so we'll hang out after the recording ends. We thank you for your active participation in the chat. For those that are watching anytime later, this is how you can get hold of us. And again, that bit.ly short link was on the front of the presentation. It should still be active for you to save. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the virtual conference, and we'll see you at a future event.